All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Chicago Archaeological Society meeting. Just to remind everyone who we are, so the Chicago Archaeological Society is a chapter of the IAAA, the Illinois Association for the Advancement of Archaeology. So our group started somewhere around 100 years ago. Not quite sure, but know the people that have joined back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. By the 60s, the name the Chicago Archaeological Society was being used. And sometime shortly after that, they joined the Illinois Association for the Advancement of Archaeology. So what that is our organization that we belong to, and it has several chapters all over Illinois to encourage people, professional, amateur, just people of general interest to get together and discuss the archaeology of Illinois. Our group furthers that with not just Illinois, as we talk about the whole world. We're lucky to be here in Chicago and have wonderful access to professors that talk about all sorts of different things. Today, we're going to be talking about a different part of the world than Illinois. But before that, I want to say thank you to everyone that's a member. Without you, none of this is possible. So your dues keep us going, allow us to have these talks over and over again throughout the year. So thank you. And if you're not a member or would like to become one, please go to our website, chicagoarchaeologicalsociety.com. And right there you have join and donate. So you're welcome to join online or send us a check. We do appreciate that. And it does keep us going. All right. But today we're going to be speaking about, yes? Oh, dinner. Oh, first off, for the people that are here, some of us want to get together and have a meal afterwards. And we're talking about either going to a Venezuelan restaurant or Prairie Moon, which is what, just American? Okay. So if anyone is interested in dinner afterwards, first off, show of hands, how many people are interested? 1, 2, 3. You'd be our guest. Okay, so we got 4 Prairie Moon show of hands and Venezuelan show of hands. All right, looks like Venezuelan. All right, so after the meeting, Venezuelan food are around the corner. All right, moving on. Too bad the Zoom people can't go out to dinner with us too. That would be nice. All right, so today we're going to be speaking about a part of the world that is as old gets, Anatolia, modern Turkey. And we have 2 speakers today that we're going to be talking about this. And we have, I'm bad with pronouncing names, Ömür Harmonșal, professor of art history at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And we have Dr. Peri Johnson from clinical assistant professor in anthropology at the University of Illinois at Chicago. So why don't I let them tell you about this special part of the world? Please welcome our guest speakers. All right. Here.
Let's share with the Zoom.
Yes. Yeah, they should be able to see that. Great.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting us. Let me see if people can see me. Thank you for inviting us to share our work today. Peri and I will be co-presenting, we're the co-authors of this paper. So we're going to be, all right, great. So I'm going to speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. I'm going to try to keep it concise. Peri's keeping a time on me. And then Peri will come up and present the second half of the talk. All right, so I'm going to jump right into it. What we would like to do, we both work at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and we're going to talk about an archaeological survey project, a landscape archaeology project that we have been co-directing since 2010. And we'd like to talk about water and ritual in the late Bronze Age in Turkey, in South Central Turkey, and how particularly within the limits of the Hittite Empire and how that relates to our project. So I'll jump right into this. So my task to get you started about what our field project is that we've been working since 2010. And then I'd like to talk about a little bit Hittite religion and ritual and how that relates to the politics of water and environment in the late Bronze Age. So the project is called the Albert Yaylası Archaeological Landscape Research Project. For those of you, in archaeology, we kind of really assume that all archaeological projects include some kind of digging. This is a landscape archaeology project. So for those of you who know about this other method of engaging with the archaeological past, which includes not digging, but other methods, instead of engaging with one single site, with one single trench or one single place, we actually work in a large region, maybe the size of Cook County, I think, roughly, if you know what I mean. And we basically, it involves documenting every single archaeological site and monument and remains within that particular region and understanding the kind of history of settlement in that.
Brady can't see the screen. Can't see their screen.
All right. Technical. Let's see what's going on here. Let me go to stop share. And then share screen. Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay. Does that look good?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay, thank you.
It's bigger, better.
Mike, can you see?
Can everyone on the Zoom can see the slides changing?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, perfect. All right, so our project is called the Albert Yaylası Archaeological Landscape Project. It's a landscape archaeology, ecology, and settlement history project that looks at the borderland landscapes of the Hittite Empire in the province of Konya. Really quickly, this project has been funded by the Venner Grant Foundation, as well as the funding from Mellon Foundation through the Humanities Without Walls Consortium in the Midwest, as well as more local funders such as the Sunak Kıraç Inan Foundation in Turkey for research on Mediterranean civilizations. And as any other project, this is, of course, teamwork. And I wanted to sort of really quickly introduce you our team. And Peri and I have been directing the project. I am responsible for the architectural documentation. We collaborate with Professor Ben Marsh from Bucknell University, who's a geomorphologist. We learn a lot from him. Müge Durusu and Shannon Martino really are responsible for our ceramics analysis widely for Bronze Age and earlier. Nilgün Öz has worked with us as an architectural conservator, and Boche Drum worked with us as an artist, researcher, filmmaker. So you'll see a lot of photographs from him as well from this. So the location of the project is in west central Turkey, south of Ankara. Some of you will know the site of Çatalhöyük in the Konya province that is just right to the right of the area that is marked. That's the famous Neolithic site, which is in the Konya plain. We work west in the western part of the Konya province, where we have pastoral landscapes, river valleys, and plains, which is a kind of a much more upland landscape that is much better watered in this kind of lake region that I will talk about. So if you want to contextualize this in the historical geography of the Hittite Empire, we're working in the southern borderlands. That's exactly where we are, in the land of Pedasa, which is a kind of a border zone with the vassal states of Harmonșal, which is kind of really close to the Mediterranean, and the Lucca lands as well. And this kind of relationship Peri will talk about in the second half. But I wanted to sort of really locate, and so the core territories, the so-called upper land of the Hittite Empire, with the capital Hattusha, is further north, closer to the Black Sea region in Turkey. And I'll also briefly take you to Hattusha in a little bit, so don't worry about it. So one of the important things that our project is really keen on studying is what is the relationship with that kind of central administration of the Hittite Empire and this borderland zone as they came in and built monuments in this area. For those of you who are interested in our project, I wanted to highlight this recent publication, which you can see from our whole team. That was published in 2022, just last year, in the Journal of Eastern Mediterranean Archaeology and Heritage Studies, and the Archaeology of Hittite Landscapes. This article kind of really it's a long article. It's a 40-page article that kind of summarizes the results of our project, and we're working on a monograph. We call it a polygraph because we're writing like 5-6 people in it. That is going to sort of deliver all the results of our project. So how did we get started? So in 2010, what we were really interested in is in this region is because right towards the end of the Hittite Empire, I want you to imagine sort of this was a kind of a 400, 500-year long-standing empire in the Anatolian plateau. For the first time, actually, with the Hittite Empire, for the first time, this Anatolian plateau was politically brought together. But right before the collapse of the empire, in the 13th century BC, the Hittite king, Anatolia IV, builds 2 water monuments in this borderland region. One is called Yalburt Yaylası Sacred Pool Monument, which you see right over here. And then the Kırlıoğlu Yayla Earthen Dam in the Kadınhanı lowlands. These are the 2 spring monuments. These are 2 water monuments that were built by the emperor, the Hittite great king, Anatolia IV, right around the same time, and about maybe 30 to 40 years before the collapse of the empire. So I wanted to provide you that context is why are the Hittite kings interested in this borderland zone? Why are they building these? So we wanted to run a regional survey to contextualize what is happening here. What was there before? How is the Hittite administration intervening into the history of this project, of this region, and how are they changing matters? So we wanted to contextualize these 2 monuments. But one of the really exciting things we do in this project is actually to compare and contrast this water infrastructure project we know from the Bronze Age to the water infrastructure that was actually implemented in the late Ottoman and sort of Turkish in the late Republic time periods, and really comparing and contrasting, because they actually, in terms of their success rate and in terms of their goals in creating a rehabilitated agricultural landscape, their goals are very similar. They both end up being failures. So we wanted to sort of compare and contrast them. So a really nice coincidence is that as the Turkish Waterworks Department was excavating in 1970, in September of 1970, for a canal to uncover the spring, a natural spring, the Yalburt spring, they came across the Hittite monument, which is the Bronze Age monument built by Ptolemy IV. And they came across these stone blocks, limestone blocks carved with hieroglyphic Luwian inscriptions. And they said, hold on a minute, there's something going on here. They called up Ankara, the Ankara Archaeological Museum, the Ankara Anatolian Civilizations Museum. So a team of archaeologists came from Ankara to excavate this site, which is a really incredible coincidence, an incredible intersection between the Turkish water infrastructure project, sort of disrupting a kind of a Bronze Age water infrastructure project. So what they excavated was this Hittite pool, what we now know as a kind of a sacred pool, which was surrounded with two rows of stone masonry, which was carved with a very long hieroglyphic Luwian inscription. This is one of the longest hieroglyphic Luwian inscriptions that we have from this time period, from the entire history of the Hittite Empire. So it's a very valuable historical document that Peri will also talk about, and they worked there between 1970 and 1975 with Raja Temizer. His team included philologists, Luwian specialists who actually worked on the sequence of these blocks. They also decided what the sequence of the blocks were based on the architectural details as well. I want to point out Mahmut Akok, a very famous architectural historian who is kind of really one of my ideal guys. I mean, I want to do something about him someday. He produced these incredible reconstruction drawings. We have his original drawings for this, and these were never really published. So here's the monument that more or less looks like this today. We're facing some architectural conservation problems, but I will come back to it as well. And Peri will talk about the significance of this inscription as it is demonstrated, and starts with actually Ptolemy's own genealogy. He gives his genealogy and then talks about his military expeditions that we'll talk about in a little bit. So the other monument is the earthen dam, the Kürlütoğlu earthen dam, that also is associated with Ptolemy's project in the region. Which was discovered in this inscription, which is also a hieroglyphic Luwian inscription, was discovered in this region in 1884 by a Polish art historian, Marian Sokolowski, who came across this water basin, actually, that has a Luwian inscription. The inscription doesn't really necessarily name Ptolemy, but it names a particular governor, Shawushka Kuwatis, who was mentioned in the seal impressions in Hattusha from the time of Ptolemy. So we're pretty sure that these two monuments, the Yalburt monument and the Kürlütoğlu monument, were built together roughly around the same time under the rulership, under the sponsorship of the same king. And this is actually an enormous, you can see this in a satellite image. This is an enormous feature that's 750 meters long. It's about 20 meters high. This is the local community understands this as an ancient earthworks monument in it. Now I'll come back to that in a little bit. So we have these two monuments. We're at the end of the Hittite Empire. It's about to collapse, and we want to understand what are these two monuments doing, right? And so we started. So two monuments built by Ptolemy the Fourth in the borderland landscape. Is this so we started with the question: is this some kind of a water infrastructure that is introduced for a kind of a politics of agricultural rehabilitation of the region? Is there some kind of a panic, right before the economic collapse of the empire? So that's one of the things we're asking. But one of the monuments is actually a kind of a ritualized symbolic monument as well. So this kind of combination of a kind of a very functional infrastructure intervention then is kind of really melded with a kind of a symbolic aspect as well. When these monuments that are out in the countryside are studied, they're usually studied as separate monuments. Let me go and study this monument. It's very art historical. This is actually not what we wanted to do. We wanted to contextualize and understand these monuments in relation to the wider landscape in which they existed. And so what is the biography? We asked, what is the biography of this diverse local landscape, and how did these monuments fit into that story? And then that actually just really, we surveyed about 125 archaeological sites in this region. And so there are settlement sites, there are cemeteries, quarries, there are sacred caves, there are sinkholes. So a variety of sites that we documented, and now we're putting them into a story. What kind of story can we tell? And what you're hearing today is part of that story that we're trying to put together. So any thoughts, comments from you would be appreciated. And I want to just really, before I pass the microphone to Peri, I want to tell you a little bit about what is the significance of these natural springs and caves and sinkholes in the Hittite religion? You may not be familiar with the sort of history of Bronze Age in the Middle East and the Hittite religion, really. We're very lucky because we have a lot of archaeology, we have a lot of inscriptions and texts from the Hittite Empire. Archaeologists, thanks to the German Archaeological Institute project in this site, we're very lucky to have a lot of particularly ritual texts, but also border treaties that we have from this time period. So we have really great references to what these monuments might mean. So I want to take you to the capital of the empire for a little bit, and then tell you about a monument that was a very curious discovery in 1988. German archaeologists excavating in Hattusha, they found this. They found 2 stone chambers on either side of a massive water reservoir. They were very puzzled because this kind of a structure didn't exist before. They couldn't really understand the function of it. This one is called Chamber 1. It was excavated in an area known as the Southern Citadel or Südberg. And it's really built with these kind of limestone blocks that are sort of beautifully fitted together in the form of some kind of a this arched chamber, right? It sort of looks like a cave, and that's what I thought when I first saw it. The second one that they excavated was even more exciting. They got really outraged. I mean, this was just a big news in Hittite archaeology. With, as you know, it's kind of really small field. Maybe there are like 15 of us who were very happy with this discovery. What it revealed is that all the walls of this stone chamber was also carved with a very long hieroglyphic Luwian inscription of one of the last kings of the empire, Shupili-Luima II. And what he's doing in this inscription, he's also talking about his military campaigns. We'll come back to that in Peri's presentation. But one thing that is really super exciting, and that chamber ended with some kind of a relief of possibly an ancestor king, possibly himself, or maybe his ancestor Shupili-Luima. We're not entirely sure with the identification of this individual. But there's a very interesting, the last line of the inscription says something super interesting, something we did not know about. And it says, the king is speaking, the great king of Hattusha is speaking. He says, "Here, a divine road of the earth, in that year I constructed." And the way that archaeologists are understanding this line is referring to this monument, right? So I want to take you back a little bit here in this drawing. So look at this water reservoir that is known as the Eastern Pond. And here is chamber 2, here is chamber 1. So these two chambers are entrances or portals into this water reservoir, which was fed by perennial springs. They're not piping water in it, but they're using sort of existing springs that are underneath that are kind of really flowing in seasonally. So very, very interesting building associated with a temple as well. So this was a major revelation. So this was translated by Professor David Hawkins at UCL. And the way that he came up with this is that this is his reading, the Deus Star Tuo sign, Deus Via Terra. This is his reading. I'm not going to go into the philological details of it, but fascinatingly, this corresponded word to word, sign to sign, to this expression called Dingir Kashkal Kur, which is translated Dingir, God, Kashkal, road, Kur of the land, divine road of the earth. So when we look at inscriptions, Hittite inscriptions, when the Hittites actually talk about this divine road of the earth, these are understood to be springs, caves, sinkholes that are portals. Do I have my 20 minutes? Okay, I'm wrapping up. So these are portals to the underworld. The really interesting thing is that anyone who dies goes to the underworld, right? So there are these underworld deities, and your ancestors are also living in the underworld. So if you wanted to talk to them, if you wanted to talk to your ancestors, what you do is you go to a spring. You go to a divine road of the earth, any portal. It could be a cave, it could be a sinkhole, it could be a spring. That's where you have a conversation with your ancestors. So that's why Hittite kings actually signed their treaties, their international treaties, at the springs, at these Dingir Kashkal Kur sites, because they wanted the ancestors to and the underground gods to be witnesses to those signing of the treaties. So this divine road of the earth comes up a lot in international treaties because that's where they are signing them, right? So, so this brings to me in 2000 and 2001, German Archaeological Institute also excavated another set of pools, which actually produced these really interesting libation arms, sort of amputated arm-shaped vessels, which were used in a particular kind of ritual. And from the analysis of the clay, we know that they were made in Cyprus. And so here's an incredible sort of assemblage of artifacts, ritual artifacts made in Cyprus that is actually coming from the bottom of these pools that actually then connects us. So the final point I'm going to make is then to go to those monuments that are mentioned in Hittite texts, and I'm connecting the dots now and saying that these are the two kinds of monuments that we come across in Hittite texts. One is Dingir Kashkal Kur, now you know, the divine road of the earth, the portal to the underworld. That's where you talk to your ancestors. This is one thing. So they're associated with springs, caves, sinkholes, and river gorges. And then the other one is called a hekur. Nafor sign is actually a sign for stone, and Sagush means the peak, so eternal rock sanctuary. So the understanding is then the Dingir Kashkal Kur are these kind of either natural or man-made caves that actually gave access to the underworld. Those are water monuments that are portals to the underworld. And then we have these rock monuments, carved images of kings and queens carved into the rock. And I think we have a lot of this. And so what I am then suggesting in a way that I've suggested this in publication as well, that this is a kind of a mimetic. This is like Hittites love imitating geological forms. They love creating artificial springs. They love creating artificial caves. And this is precisely what they're creating in architecture, a kind of an architectural gesture of imitating geological forms. So this brings me finally to our water monuments, Yalburt Monument. And this is the other monument called Plato's Spring, or Eflatun Pınar in Turkish, which is also located in this lakes region a little bit south of where we work. These are the two major sacred pool buildings that we know from this time period. Eflatun Pınar is slightly earlier, and then Yalburt Monument. So you can see this Dingil Kashkar Kur notion as it appears in Hittite texts and as it appears in Hittite religion, as it appears in archaeology is very, very important to us, because what we think is that this is the significance of a mountain spring, is that it is where it is a portal to the underworld. And so if you look closely, so Totalia's monument that where we work on actually has a long hieroglyphic Luwian inscription, whereas the Eflatun Pınar monument is not inscribed. It has no inscription, but it does have a really nice decorated architecture with these trapite reliefs. This is slightly earlier. It's about 100 years earlier than Yalburt monument, but it is decorated with mountain and spring deities, and possibly this kind of really rather worn, the sun goddess of the earth and the storm god, which were the main deities of the Hittite pantheon. So I'm going to show you a kind of a drawing from the German Archaeological Institute. You can see these five individuals. They're spring deities, and they have these skirts that look like a mountain. So they're mountain springs. And you see these little holes in their bellies. So when the spring was functioning, water would come out, would spurt out from their bellies. So imagine this kind of really incredible spectacle of water spurting out of this architectural monument. So another point that I'm trying to make, how Hittites imagined their architecture as a kind of imitation of geological forms and recreating those geological forms in this kind of really creative, really amazing monuments. And finally, to connect it to Yalburt, this is a relief that Peri has published and worked on, that was found also in Yalburt, that illustrates the mountain god hugging an image of Totalia. So this, where we think is that Yalburt Monument is one of these important portal sites that we know. So I'm going to pass the microphone to Peri. Thank you so much for listening.
So we'll come back to this mountain at the very end of my little contribution. So we've been really talking today so far about the 13th century, and one of the main things that one of the main sites that's associated with Yalburt, is the site of Uzun Pınar, which is this possibly 14th century, but built up probably mostly in the 13th century, which is facing Yalburt across a inland drainage basin right there. So this site is a very unusual site that we worked on extensively in 2021, that we interpret mostly as a new foundation, but it doesn't have a traditional shape to a Hittite city, because it's very expansive and has a lot of compounds, massive compounds that stretches across a terraced landscape with springs. It also has a main fortification, which we dated to the 13th century. So this is a site that we're interpreting mostly as a military site, a site where you could assemble troops within these large compounds on the edge in this 13th century location. And so Ömür really didn't talk too much about, he mentioned, this, the Yalbert inscription quite a bit, but it is a particularly violent imperial inscription. And so the relationship of Uzun Pınar as a military city plus the contemporaneous inscription, they go together as this sort of a site of military expansion of the Hittite Empire in the 13th century. And so we have here, I just have the beginning and one section. It's of course a longer inscription. It starts, the son, great king Labarna, Tutalia, hero, son of Hattusili, great king, hero, grandson of Mushili, great king, hero. And then it goes on to mention a whole bunch of cities and lands that are destroyed and captured and become part of the Hittite Empire. And it says, I smote the land of Nipira. Frequently they talk about women kneeling down, and I destroyed it. The storm god, the Lord, ran before me, and the Luca lands I destroyed. So I just bring this example because most of these places that the inscription is referring to are thought to be to the southwest of our survey area. So in the Luca lands or classical Lycia. So this is sort of that landscape, that 13th century imperial landscape that the Tutalia IV works in this area belong in. I mean, I just wanted to mention that there is, Ilion in Troy, which is known as Wilusa up in the northwest of the Anatolian Peninsula. Then there's Apasa or Ephesus in the middle. I should probably mention these. And Milawanda, that is the classically known site of Miletus, the same place, and then Inawanda, the land of grapes, down in Lycia, which is mentioned actually in the text. Then there are other sites, so you can follow them that are well located because of the linguistic comparisons between later sites in the area. So we have Parha, which is Perge down there. And so this is this landscape in which, the Hittite Empire is really expanding into the West at the same time as there seems to be some, agricultural issues going on within the empire itself. So there's these two combinations of, imperial expansion, agricultural infrastructure, and what is going on in our survey area. Why is it borderlands, and what does it mean to be the border of an empire here? Because this inscription refers to all this expansion, to the southwest. There's expansion to the west directly, to Apasa. These are those coastal cities, are ones that have connections to the Mycenaean world of the Aegean. And so you can really see this comparison of, what is going on in the late Bronze Age in the Aegean with what's going on in the Anatolian Peninsula. So this is all going on in the 13th century, but I wanted to go back 3 centuries to talk about the arrival of the Hittite Empire in this area and to see how it was formed as a borderland. So now I'm going to move on to this section, which is the founding of a new city within the Hittite Empire. And what does it mean to found a new city? And then perhaps why we can understand the Hittite Empire sort of falling apart. So we've been, talking about the 13th century. Now we're going back to the 16th century, to this city, to this site of Kale Tepesi, which is located on the big east-west thoroughfare where everyone seems to have passed through. Everyone throughout history seems to have gone on this road, including Cyrus the Younger, many different, it's the main conduit through. But at the same time, of course, it's on this outcrop that it has tons of springs in it. So we can imagine that we have these same points of having more Dingle Kushgal Kur at this site as well. So we have this fossil spring right below this. Maybe I should be using this instead so people online can see below this standing portion of the standing fortress of the site itself. Really, we had this very expansive area where we were working, and we didn't properly, spend too much time at a lot of sites until we sort of focused in 2021 on Uzun Pınar and Kale Tepesi, and we're starting this new project at Kale Tepesi that just focuses on the site itself. So our idea about the city, about Kale Tepesi, sort of changed really in 2021. So I wanted to go into a little bit of detail about how we understand the city today. This is where the spring has been moved to, so that it's adjacent to the road today. So individuals can still come, because this is considered one of the two very sweet springs in the entire region. And so, as you can see, so in 21, we finally sort of were able to place that standing portion of the fortress, which is located here, and place it within a much more expansive urban environment. In this year, we had these layered mapping techniques of the geophysical survey. It was georadar. We did drone mapping here. We also did a lot of just ground tracing. I'll come into the detail why we're looking at wall footings and not much else in a lot of places. And then, of course, archaeological find sampling, and then this topographic survey, which was done with an EDM and stone-to-stone drawing. So our plan doesn't properly, I'm sort of embarrassing, but it doesn't properly have a lot of that data yet in it, because it's a lot of sort of bringing it in together. But I will talk about these different components of the city that was part of this new foundation that came into the area in the 16th century. So one of the most important aspects of this architecture is its monumental presence. The Hittites are coming into this area and building these massive buildings in a walled city that has this very important focus on appearances. The Uzun Pınar site, it's 3 centuries later, has none of this. Absolutely none of this monumental, beautiful architecture. So, the fortress is right here, the standing fortress. So in 2021, we finally sort of moved beyond looking at ceramic distributions to try to find, actually the limits of the monumental architecture, so that we're defining the city based upon those limits today. Okay, so here's our stone-to-stone drawing of the standing fortress. Here, you can see that it has this monumental ashlar blocks, and this was a big problem for us, and still actually is a problem today, because it's always dated to the Hellenistic period. Even there's such a hesitation. I have another site that I'm also proposing to working on, where also everyone wants this to belong to the 3rd century BCE instead of the 16th century BCE. So you're always fighting against this, pushing everything down to the Hellenistic period. But you can sort of see that there's the drafted edges at the corners, which is supposed to be 4th century, but at the same time, these tight corners. But when you look at the details of the masonry, you can see very clearly that you had the pillow joints and the corner joints that mesh together. There's no metal involved, and particularly there are no metal tools used in the fashioning of the stone itself. So this building is still standing today. So it was remodeled, in the Roman period. And so there is evidence of stone tools in various places. But that you can see those, it's quite clear that they're very different. Instead, what we have are the standard percussion marks that you get from having stone tools. And these are really megalithic blocks. Another most important part of the site is that the outcrop that it rests on is dolomitic limestone, which is a hard stone. And really, no one uses it. No one in the late Bronze Age uses dolomitic limestone. It comes in at the very end in the 12th century when you start to have your first, iron tools, And so the one thing that we noticed was that this whole outcrop here is dolomitic limestone with schist underneath, but there is this marl stone quarry over here. And I wanted to sort of show the process. It was Ben Marsh really who set out to identify what was the stone of the fortress. So here he is, studying the marl stone blocks of Kale Tepesi, and then he went off to go find the marl in the vicinity. It's only a kilometer away, so it's not very far. But then we surveyed the site the next year. You could sort of see the, typical quarried layer landscape in this plan, but throughout the quarry as well are these drill holes. So you would take a stone tool on a wooden stick and drill it down, and then you add wood and water and expands out and it crack the stone with this. So you have these lines of drill holes that would break the stone. This is marl that forms into natural horizontal layers itself. And also we have this, one of the pieces already wedged up and ready for removal that was left in situ in the quarry. So, and then of course, all over the site, including the city, and the quarry, and then also the next place, which is the Masons camp, we have gabbro hammers. So there's no gabbro quarry that's closer than 50 kilometers. So at least they're bringing these big, we have boulders. So they're bringing these big boulders of gabbro to the site, probably in wagons, and then breaking them down into hammers. This is a particularly nice hammer, but they're all over the site. So at this point, everyone who's doing work always is taking a point for every little gabbro chip they have to see if we can find out where the monumental architecture is, because that's where you're going to have a marl building underneath that area with the gabbro chips. And so they're all over. It's like, and they're very distinctive green, dark green stone. So, and also below the marl stone quarry, several years after we surveyed the quarry itself, we found this Masons village. So they're working a lot of the stones right below the quarry itself. And in this village, it's just not a very nice place. There probably was some seasonal water, but it's not a place that you would have a settlement. It's really clearly this place where imperial workers are being housed. And the reason why we know that, in addition to its sort of unpleasant sort of location, is that we have here some examples, there's many more, of course, of the ceramics from here. And the ceramics at this site is part of this imperial assemblage of redistributive imperial economy where agricultural produce was collected and then it was cooked in a communal setting of institutions and then redistributed to workers. So you have all these standard pieces of ceramics and large food preparation vessels as well. So these are these rims, these two rims of these multi-purpose bowls. They're big vessels for preparing beer or mixing bread. Perhaps someone is familiar with some of the similar kind of vessels from Egypt. And then we have these anti-splash rim bowls, or these thin bowls were clearly for the distribution of rations. So consumption within these vessels. There's also huge baking plates, and it's part of this imperial assemblage that you find in an institution. Right. So you have the collection of a lot of agricultural produce into these big depots, and then it's distributed out. So the state becomes this place of where the food comes from a lot of these sites, right? And so we have a lot of sites in the landscape around Kale Tepesi that sort of belong to this system of this imperial ceramic assemblage and food consumption pattern. This is just over here we have the Kale Tepesi assemblage, which is very similar. So we don't have, we don't have this landscape full of, villages that have a kind of standard food production, cooking vessels. This emerges in the next period, after the collapse of the empire in the Iron Age. So this is collected to, as I said, these imperial buildings, temples for one, but other palatial buildings, other complexes. So here we just have our georadar, but this is this vast area of monumental buildings on the northeast slope that's around the standing fortress. So we surveyed a lot of those in 2021, and we hope to work there this coming summer, provided, funds and permits, which we are applying for. But we did do a lot of preparatory work on the surface with this stone-to-stone drawing and the georadar. So we had these big buildings, and they're also, connected to all sorts of infrastructure that's tied to agriculture, such as weirs, and around the city itself. And so the city has this clear distinction, though. The city walls is divided into areas where there's monumental walls made of marl that are very prominent. And then there are sections of walls that are built with whatever stone can be pried off the ground at the spot to create the sort of the filler bits of walls. And so there we can see how does the city oriented. The city is clearly oriented to the northeast, to the valley to the northeast, because a lot of the buildings. So we have a section here of monumental city wall facing towards the northeast, and it probably is near a gate segment near there as well. But then most of the site is this rubble stone wall. And on the summit, we know what the wall looked like. I know it's a little hard. We haven't done enough of the mapping out of the wall shapes, but you can see that there are these cross walls here. And so it's a casemate wall made with rubble stone, dolomitic limestone bits and pieces from the bedrock itself right at that site. So this is only preserved because it was used in the Iron Age, and so they maintained it. But also on the summit, we did find marl, little bits and pieces of marl. This is not a place you would ever want to excavate because of the lack of deposition, but we probably have a temple at the very top of the hill as well. So one of the big problems of working at this site, though, was that a lot of the walls are spoliated. So most of them are, I would say half of them are sort of, the stones have been reused in Iron Age burials of different kinds, mostly tumuli in the parts of the city that were abandoned after the late Bronze Age. So this whole area here is just a massive tumulus field. And the other thing is that there's a German railroad that goes through over here, and the German railroad engineers used the marl stone to build their culverts. And so they also used marl stone in the Chaussee road that went by the site as well. So these late 19th century construction projects are using this marl stone and removing a lot of the walls. So in my drawing, you can see that there's all these gray bits, which is the sort of the restored. It's where there's wall footing, such as this one right here. Remember, so it's wall footings that are done in dolomitic limestone with gabbro tools. So it's something that you can mostly see from satellite imagery, and then you go down to check because it's really the pattern that you see, and then you can see the footings, once you get on the ground, once you already know the pattern. Because as I said, they're not making really visible wall footings when the stone is too hard for them, for their tools. And so there's just a few places where there's like little bits of stone. So this site, it's a little bit But so the site then is the kind of city, city that the Hittites are building at the edge of their empire to institute their empire. It's a city that's based upon agricultural infrastructure. It's a city that's based on redistributive economy of collecting all the agriculture into the city and then redistributing it out. So the argument really is that if there's a place like just a few years of drought, which is now being proposed, that the empire could collapse just because of a few years, because the empire itself was so heavily involved in the sustenance of the populace. Right. So this is sort of why, because of this redistributive economy in this area. So we now know that, our area is, it's within the empire, but it is at the edge, right? Because right when you move to the next valley over, you don't have the cities end. The cities that have that ceramic assemblage end, and we then are into the area of vassal kingdoms that are structured slightly differently. I also work in northern Turkey, and so I work in an area also outside of the redistributive economy up there, which also has very, a different kind of ceramic assemblage. So I just wanted to end coming back to the mountain that Yalburt is located on. So Ömür started with this slide here in the title slide, which is of Şangır Mağaza. It is a sinkhole in dolomitic limestone, which is this Karın fields that is above the Yalburt spring itself. So it's a net water endpoint. And actually, Yalburt is very exceptional in this landscape because most of the water flows down flow out in the plain. So Yalburt is that one place where the water that's flowing into the rock in this Karın fields emerges on the mountain slope itself. So I worked extensively on the material from this site last summer. So I'm going to give a talk on it at the AIAs. And also my daughter was helping me doing a lot of the drawing. So this site, we did find one Iron Age shirt here. This site has been looted twice on a massive scale with dynamite and mining scale excavators with a 4-meter wide buckets, so it's really hard to deal with the site can't really be excavated. And it's possible that this is 2 kilometers from Yalburt. It's possible it's part of the sacred landscape of Yalburt in the late Bronze Age, but we will never know. But we do have that one Iron Age shirt. But what happens in the Hellenistic period, which is after Rome defeats the Seleucids in the Seleucid Empire, which has its center in Mesopotamia. In 188, this area enters into the control of the Pergamene kingdom from the Aegean coastline. And the Pergamene kings come in, they found some cities in this area again, and this is their new borderland. And so this sinkhole, instead of Yalburt itself, but this sinkhole becomes the sacred place in the landscape. And also there is then a transition from, the mountain deity, which are male deities. So at this point there is the standard transition in Anatolia to, in the Hellenistic period, the mountain deities are mother goddesses. So what we have here at the sinkhole that's just 2 kilometers from Yalburt is a sanctuary. It's enclosed within walls for feasting, and feasting rooms are located above, and all the remnants from the feasting would be dropped down into here. So we have architectural fragments, but we also were working on the figurines last summer, and my daughter drew this little bit. I know it's hard to see, but we have here the face of a lion and a knee and a hand holding up the drapery. So I hope you could see that. So what we have here is a seated mother goddess on a throne with 2 lions on either side of her. So we clearly can see that we have the Mater, or the mother goddess, as the sacred deity of the mountain. So the mountain of Yalbert continues to be sacred, but it becomes involved in this Hellenistic mother goddess landscape at this later period. But we can see, I think that we can trace this continuity through time as well. So I guess it's the end of our talk. I hope people have some questions. So Phyllis has her hand raised. I don't know, or yeah. Or I'll let you touch the.
If Phyllis, you'd like to ask a question, you have your hand raised. Oh, I can't hear you.
Maybe do you want to stop sharing? You can see that.
Well, I can see her here,
Okay.
but she's still muted. There she is.
I just wanted to let you know in the beginning, when we had the, we didn't have the screen from the
Oh,
speaker.
okay. All right, still up from there. Okay. All right. Any questions from Zoom while we're at it?
Could she tell us a little bit about the underworld? Could she tell us about the mythology that the people had, who were the gods?
Go ahead.
Yes.
You go ahead and talk about the underworld. It's sort of divided down there. It's right.
Yes, I can do that. So according to Hittite beliefs, when someone dies, you go to the underworld, and it's a world where there are also a series of underworld deities, the main one being the sun goddess of the underworld. So Hittites believe that every night the sun goddess went into, when the sun goes down, it would go into the underworld. And the belief was that there's a belief in the afterlife, so everyone who dies goes to the underworld to live. And so it was a world that is kind of really parallel to our world. So there's always some kind of communication between the two. And water was one element, one sort of physical element that connected the underworld to our world. And that's why it's just really the places where water went down into the ground, or where it came up, was a really important place to actually have communication. So a lot of rituals that were associated with these water places, so any kind of rivers, riverbank. There were a lot of rituals in Hittite texts talking about riverbank. There are a lot of rituals associated with springs, and also caves as well. So that really required any kind of communication of asking your ancestors' opinion about something. Would be conducted through either at the close to the river, or at a spring as well. So that's the connection that we're trying to establish, if that's helpful.
There's also, I want to add one thing, that it's also a place of pollution and sickness. So a lot of the rituals involved bringing the underworld deities up by taking an earthen unfired dagger and piercing like a riverbank.
The dagger.
Yeah, and then like putting the illness into the dagger, into those deities, and then dissolving them with water. So taking the unfired deities and washing them away and washing them back into the earth. So there's a lot of illness, sickness, and rituals involved with putting that into the underworld.
Thank you.
This is always my problem with contemporary archaeology. I think.
Oh, yeah, could you come up here, would you mind? Just so the audience there can hear your question. Thank you.
Well, I'm just hearing this stuff about the portals and the other underworld, and all these shamanic world practices and esoteric places still have used these as rituals. And if you look at springs, who controls the spring water? All the corporations control all the spring water. So it's interesting when you talk about stuff like this as if it's a fantasy or as if it's a way of the old world, because, we became into like religion and now there's like a huge like atheist movement, so it's like, but if you go all over the world, I'm sure as you guys know, people are still practicing these rituals. I practice these rituals, so even if you go with the theories that actually inner earth does exist, on the level that we're existing on this earth, and you live your life that way, then it's still valid, so it's just interesting how it's all kind of this thing. Well, these people, very ancient, and then this is how but I think that obviously you guys know, because you're spending time in these places, that people are very still connected to the land and to the water and to the rituals. And I do think, I'm a little bit of a conspiracy theorist. I think that, the elites know this, and then they're able to control a lot of the resources, just as the government, and over time, like a lot of the empires did. So yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're correct to note that the Hittite Empire is taking these springs and incorporating them into their imperial ideology. But these sites, we do document all the later uses of the sites. And for example, the Yalbert area, according to the Green Gosher's dad, is part of the location where Hussein went before he was martyred, and the water came out of the sinkhole when Hussein was living. I mean, the Caliph Hussein was living at Yalbert, so like it gets involved into it's part of the Islamic landscape as well. But I have to agree with you that those who are doing a lot of the looting as well have sort of incorporated this water stories into how they wish to understand the sites that they're looting, so that they have incorporated, like the mounds, they want to be tombs, and that the water that came from Yalbert and so there's a flood story, and they want it to be flooding the landscape so that they're looting tombs instead of settlement sites. It gets really complicated, but it's really this meshing of like late capitalist use of resources with these old stories as well. So I wouldn't
like the ice wall, Antarctica, the ice wall that no one talks about. Argon, all these theories, and I think these just kind of build on these theories, and there are portals possibly to the inner earth. There are going to be other worldly beings that do exist, but we're just in such kind of a frame of the 3D mind, and we don't see anything like that.
Yeah.
It's always
See if the microphone will pick up.
My question to you is, briefly, can you tell us first who the Hittites were, two, where did they come from, and three, where did they go?
We were wondering how much of an intro we should say. So the Hittites, they speak in Indo-European language, and they are, in the Anatolian Peninsula. They speak multiple Indo-European languages. Luwian is one of them. There's also Hattic, Palaic, and they're connected to the languages that are there as well after the collapse of the Hittite Empire in the Iron Age, which is Lydian and Sidaic and others. So they're there, I guess, and they have a lot of connections with Mesopotamia, and in the previous period, so in the period prior to the Hittite Empire, there are these city-states. And in the city-states, there's a lot of trade and metallurgy going on, and Assyrians from Mesopotamia come and form colonies on the edges of these cities. And so we have one site in particular that, so we have some historical sources about that. So the Hittites are emerging from this city-state background in Anatolia. They're, an indigenous group that emerges.
And where did they go?
Oh,
They don't go anywhere. They didn't come from anywhere. They didn't go anywhere. They're still there. And so I think just because there's generally a kind of we try to impose some kind of a migration idea to ancient communities, which is often exaggerated. The current understanding is that Hittite Empire is the first political entity that united the Anatolian Peninsula for the first time. So prior to that, we didn't actually see a kind of a territorial state with the kind of ambitions of the Hittite Empire. So they didn't really go anywhere. It kind of really, the empire kind of really devolved into this kind of, in the Iron Age, with the collapse of the global economy in the 12th century, the empire collapsed. The Hattusha was abandoned, but Hattusha was kind of really already in great decline. And I think what we understand from the abandonment of Hattusha is that it was peacefully abandoned. It was not burned. It was cleaned. It was people basically picked up their suitcases and left. And my understanding, and if you care to read my monograph, which is called Cities and Shaping of Memory in the Ancient Near East, I argue that Hittite, this administration actually moved south. So what we see next happening is all of these small kingdoms, which we call Syro-Hittite kingdoms. There's a kind of a continuation of language, Luvian, and continuation of a kind of a Hittite ideology of kingship that continues in these small kingdoms. There's largely formed in southern Anatolia and southeastern Anatolia, northern Syria, and northern Iraq. So and the Levant, and you can take sort of Israel, Palestine. So there's a whole series of kingdoms that are also related to all of these. So what happens is that this power structure moves south slightly, if that's what you're asking. But I don't think there's any kind of major population movements that actually.
I just want to add in that there is a dominant theory that I'm completely opposed to, that there is a arrival of a new language, perhaps. It's that the Phrygian comes in, perhaps, but Phrygian is related to Armenian, and so we possibly have a language emerging into written text for the first time, and that belongs to the northern strata, so it's Black Sea. So that then, if this is the case, then we don't really have to have the Phrygians arriving. I'm working on this for my new project as well. And so that we would have Armenian, Phrygian, Thracian, and Greek, all related languages that emerge in the Iron Age for the first time as written languages.
Does anyone still identify as Hittite? Would they still use that term? Or they would just say maybe our ancestors were Hittite?
No, I mean, this was used actually in the early Turkish Republic. This was used as a kind of a part of ideology. Some kind of connect. They attempted to make a connection between Hittites and Turks, which of course didn't scientifically work out. There are, I mean, it was fabricated. All of these nation states, they all wanted to sort of, Armenians connect with Urartians. Kurdish community connects with sort of North Mesopotamian, Assyrian, the connections with Assyrians. And there was even a group called, associated themselves with Sumerians. And there was an argument about Sumerian is related to Turkish. Or of course, these are kind of really not, these have been proven to be not scientifically correct, just because we're talking about 3,000 years sort of passing through. So that kind of thankfully, that kind of really nation state, because nation states, when they form, they want to distance themselves from the recent past. So the early modern Turkish state, they wanted to distance themselves from the Ottoman Empire, which was associated with the sick man of Europe and, the kind of a collapsed empire. The identity was going to be moved to a modern and modernist and idealist identity that then you can connect it, if you can actually connect it to an ancient culture, that would be a kind of a legitimization of that state. So leaders in Turkey established, there was a Turkish Historical Society was precisely established to excavate and find out about Hittites. They were meant to run excavations to find Hittites. And really interestingly, the first site that was excavated by these archaeologists who were sent to Europe to get educated and excavate Hittites. They excavated, and this was actually, they astonishingly, they found this incredible cemetery at the site of Alajahuk, which produced these ritual artifacts. They were, now we know them, they're early Bronze Age. They have nothing to do with Hittites. But because they were looking for Hittites, these artifacts immediately were associated with this kind of identity. So if you look at early Turkish industrial, like a biscuit company, the first cigarette company, they all have these Alajahuk ritual symbols as their symbols, and everyone still thinks that they're Hittite. They have nothing to do with Hittite because they're early Bronze Age. We're talking about 2,000 years of difference. But it's really, really quite interesting as a question, just because that identity was suddenly brought up, with the discovery of Hittite, with the decipherment of Hittite, I guess the study of ancient languages. But Hittite Empire is really a very, very eclectic empire, right? So in Hattusha, we have archives of Sumerian texts, we have archives of Akkadian texts, we have archives of all kinds of different languages, and they were very well connected to the Mesopotamian sort of components at that time as a kind of a global connection. But then they were choosing to use a local indigenous native language, which was Luvian, that was being spoken in Anatolia. So they built all these monuments, including Yalbert Monument, and the monument that I showed you from Hattusha, they were decorated with inscriptions in Luvian, but that was not the official language of the state. The official language of the state was Hittite. And so it is like an entirely, so it's really, really interesting how a state using a particular official administrative language in their own capital and in all their correspondences and bureaucracy, but in their monuments, they're choosing an entirely different language, an entirely different writing system, which I find quite fascinating. And it kind of really, we can associate that with this kind of inclusive and interesting policy of the Hittites that it comes from this kind of really idea. They called themselves the land of 1,000 deities. So they incorporated sort of gods and goddesses of all the provinces. For example, in Hattusha, we had a temple for the storm god of Aleppo. They brought a storm god from Aleppo. These are hundreds of miles away. They brought a storm god from Aleppo and built a temple for him. So it was just like this kind of eclecticism of running a territorial state, and kind of really respecting the indigenous cultures of the entire territory was something that was kind of really unique about Hittites. That's great.
I'm sorry, what esoteric question? Can this be like related to like what is it that Zoroastrians, how these groups, these more of these esoteric groups were pushed out of these regions, and they had kind of these similar connections to maybe Sumerians or Mesopotamian, with these different honor for these deities and these rituals, and then the Hittite is kind of a people that's also connected with that, where you're honoring the different types of entities all around and creating this as your altar and your ritual, and respecting all the different kind of community, because that's just what I'm channeling myself. But
so I do work on the Achaemenid Empire, and so anything Zoroastrian is foreign to this landscape. It comes in at that time, but I do want to say that it gets incorporated into the caves. I'm editing a friend's article right now that is about the arrival of the Zoroastrian, I believe, in their placement in caves, but they're always manufactured stepped tunnels. And they belong to the kingdom to the northeast in that area.
Can I add one more thing to that? Just really quick, and this point is really quite interesting about Totalia. We talked about Totalia, and he He's known to have sponsored what we call today cult inventories. He asked his people to ask, go survey every single esoteric religion in our land and bring it to me. And they have this incredible compilation of, look, here's a little deity. This is how they do the ritual. This is what, offered to them. And it's like, there's an incredible archive that he created. Just this really incredible guy.
And
Yeah.
it has an inventory of all the good things that these deities have. Like this deity has this crystal mace, and yeah, so it goes into great detail.
Thank you, thank you.
I know Dr. Dale had a question.
Mark's been waiting.
Right. All right, a couple of things. One, a comment, because I lived for a long time on the west side of Albuquerque. And right in my backyard were petroglyphs, basically, up against the escarpment. And they had, like you were talking about, this thing you're investigating about the pathway, and you mentioned that's current and ancient, and just kind of a lot of religions, faiths, things, including Christian faith, for that matter, in the center of the earth. They have these rock drawings on the patina of the oxidized iron ore coming out of it or whatever. And they have this one that's a spiral that is the path, they say the pathway for the gods that live in the center of the earth, and they would feed them by rubbing corn and grains and things and leaving it at the base of the rocks. And so, it's here, it's there, it just seems like it's almost everywhere we think about it, that type of thing. The others who I'm just interested in, your publishing, you said you had the 140-page journal article. Are there other things? Are you done with your field work out there, or is, you're in a publishing stage, or is thinking this all through, or what?
Well, the survey is being published. Yeah, so that 10-year survey is what we're working on for publication. We have these other articles that are published in books on Anatolian archaeology. And then of course we have a lot of preliminary reports which we put online. But now we're starting a new project, the Kali Tepesi project. And then I'm also starting another project, which is an Iron Age city that's just to the south of our survey area. So these two big projects, mine is survey because it's brand new, but ours might actually be excavation. That's the idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're
excavate those monumental buildings.
So the survey ran from 2010 to 2018. So we're compiling all of that work into one major volume. We're putting that together. And another interesting thing is that Yalburt excavations that happened from 1970 to 75. Those were never published. So we have all the artifacts and we have all the reports, day-to-day reports and all the drawings. So another thing that we're trying to incorporate in that volume is also to offer that to everyone sort of as part of the publication, because the excavation of that monument was also never published. And so so we went to the Ankara Museum that had in their archives all the artifacts that were excavated in that excavation, and so we're doing that work, but it's a little slow. But if you want to. So the article that I mentioned is the latest thing that we published, and that's a little model of the book. So it's going to be, the book will be an expansion, and we will of course have all the data in it as well. So.
Not all data.
2 years or something, or?
Yes. Well, I mean, these things are just really slow. We are 5 authors on it, or maybe 6. Yeah, 6 authors. So coordinating 6 authors living in different parts of the world is a little tough. That article we wrote during the pandemic, and we were having, by doing Zoom meetings every single week, it was just like incredible amount of work. We do collaboration in the form of not dividing up chapters, and you write this chapter, you write this chapter. We don't do that. We're actually just really running, discussing every single point and achieving a consensus on it, and then writing that up. So it's really taking quite a bit of time. But it's really, that article also presents some kind of a model of a kind of a methodological toolkit. how do you do landscape archaeology? I mean, we were a little bit really ambitious. Landscape archaeology doesn't really exist in the Hittite sort of world yet. This is one of the first projects that actually looks at Hittite landscapes. There has been no projects that actually properly looked at landscape in this method. So it's also a kind of a methodological, we had to build our own methodological tool. In that sense, it was really, really hard. And every single year, sort of arguing with the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, do you have to work one more year? So every single year, those permits applications is just such a hassle. Sometimes you don't get your permit when there's an upset individual, So this is really incredibly hard work in that sense.
It's 5 o'clock. Sorry to be a party pooper.
But there's one, there
Can
was
we
a.
do one more question, please? Sorry. I just first want to congratulate you. I great to your point about landscape archaeology. It's very interesting to see that approach being taken here. I work in the Pacific where it's a quite common way to look at, because we've got a subcircumscribed island and we can go. So I very much congratulate how you bring together multiple data sets in here, from very micro artifacts up to larger landscape approaches. So congratulations on that, your team.
Thank you. Thank you so
I
much.
found it interesting you brought up about the German Archaeological Institute, the DAI. They've got their works in many places, and they brought to light a lot of things. They also work on Easter Island, where they're studying a place called Avarangauka, which is a water channeling system where the elites would go to bathe and have their sort of off time. So for me, for the last 20 years, instead of your political ecology approach, I think it'd be interesting if you guys ran a political economy approach.
Wow.
Because what you're really showing to me is chiefs and elites in the Pacific and Polynesia, they try to triangulate 3 forms of knowledge, or 3 forms of power: ideology, control of the political economy, and military conquests. You have all 3 of those puzzle pieces that you could work from and move that. So I think that just listening, especially the most pertinent detail, is that redistribution of food. That is tall tale political economy, and how elites, in your case, are able to bottleneck certain things like that. And that's why you're having that consistent ceramic. They want to know who's giving that food out. And then that further promotes the hegemony that chiefs can use to, well, in our case, chiefs, in your case, your elites. So I would consider that. Look at some literature, especially about archaeological political economy, because you guys have everything to weave a good story. And then that's based on the environment that you're into. Side note, being autochthonous is something we deal with in the Pacific a lot, that people are coming from the whole, right? That people appear gods and whatnot. This is another great case study of that, of people that see that certain deities are autochthonous. They arrive from there. That's the sprout of life. And on Easter Island, we have a lot of caves too, and there's a lot of great stories of deities. So I just thought it'd be interesting if you would consider that in the future, if you're looking for more feedback and questions. Check out a PE approach, because I think would maybe have you look at things a little differently. Thank you so much for your
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having me.
Are you gonna be joining for dinner?
Sorry.
I just want to remind everybody that we're gonna have our holiday party. So no meeting in November, as always, and then our holiday party is gonna be December 3rd, right here at the Evanston Public Library at 2 p.m. And watch your email. We're going to do a sheet for a potluck. So figuring out which dishes were going to be brought by which people. But remember that December 3rd, Evanston Public Library, 2 p.m. Hope to see you all here. And again, thank you for being part of the Chicago Archaeological Society. As a member, you get the Codex, which is our wonderful newsletter that comes out almost every month. And you're part of the Illinois Association for the Advancement of Archaeology, and you get wonderful publications from them throughout the year. Any other announcements?
We had 16 here, I think, and 16 online. So we had a total of 32 people. 16 online and 16 here, so a total attendance of 32, so, we got stuff out.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Hope to see you in December.
So much.